No mai, haere mai. Welcome to the Maxim Institute podcast. My name is Jason Heal. I'm the Communications Manager at Maxim Institute, and this is our weekly short-form podcast. These podcasts are released in tandem with our weekly column and are a chance for you to hear in-depth from the column's author about some of the thinking that went into producing their final piece. Today we talk to Maxim researcher Natasha Baulis about her recent column. Natasha, it's great to have you back with us. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
We are talking about your article for Maxim this week, Fishing for Truth, Consuming News Responsibly. And I love the fishing metaphor, but I also really appreciate the amount of examples from recent news that just blew this whole thing open. You've got, as you've written in your column, Radio New Zealand acted as a Kiwi branch of the Russian propaganda machine, Stuff's reporting being off balance, and TVNZ quoting Hitler. There's a lot of, shall we say, fallacies that are being used in reporting the news.
Some could have said that the challenge could have been limiting it to just these examples.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, there's been a lot more. We just plucked a few fish from the sea. Why is this a problem for us with our news?
I think that's a really good question, because I think one of the things that has been said around this question of fallacies in the news is, well, don't we just have fallacies in everyday conversation anyway? Is it really that big a problem?
Yeah.
And I would say that it's probably a problem that we have them that much in everyday language anyway, but probably an unavoidable problem at that point. But particularly in the news, everyone knows you hold the media to another standard. And that's because the news, the media are supposed to act as part of the democratic process. So they're meant to equip us with the information we need to make wise political decisions. And at the moment, they're not really fulfilling that requirement. We have apparently objective bodies that we refer the media to when they're misbehaving, and that's because there is a standard that we have for factual reporting. And that's really, really important to a healthy democracy.
So I guess the fact is that people have kind of confused reporting for conversations or Twitter threads or
absolutely.
or that sort of thing.
And the waters are becoming polluted because more and more we're turning to social media for our news, and we're not seeing that actually opinion and factual reporting are two very different things. And it's not that you want to shut down all opinion-based conversation, but we don't want to be using that as evidence for the decisions that we make at a policy level.
Yeah. So take us through a couple of these logical fallacies. And every time I hear that, I just think of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and Professor Kirk going, logic, what do they teach them in these schools? And so give us a quick lesson maybe in some of these fallacies that we might encounter to help us combat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would point out there's lots and lots and lots of fallacies. They often overlap, and you'll see them being used, more than one of them in the same argument.
Yeah, I think one of them here you've got is like a collection of fallacies in one, which is, we'll get to that in a minute. Yeah.
But yes, it's just to say that it's helpful to know what to call them so that you can identify them and call them out. So, one of the first examples that I use is the appeal to authority. And this one's a little bit tricky because, we have authorities, we put authorities in place because we rely on them to make some judgments on our behalf, because the amount of information that's necessary to make those informed decisions is not something that every single person can do on their own.
So it's not to say of the heavy lifting for us.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
We've looked at all this data, and here's what we've.
Yeah. And so it's not to say that authority is bad. It's not to say that we shouldn't turn to people with expertise, but it's to say that just because they're labeled an expert or an authority on something isn't the basis of the truth of their argument. Their argument is either logical or it isn't. And we can you kind of use their authority as evidence that maybe this is where the truth lies, but you still have to keep digging beyond that to make sure that it's true. And I think particularly at the time when certain institutions do seem to be struggling with their information streams, we should be more careful than ever about making sure that we're checking up on the facts.
So an authority might be, rather than the arbiter of truth, a signpost towards truth.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good analogy for it. Yeah.
Okay. And so kind of following on from that, we've got where you just kind of mentioned that some of our information streams might have a particular point of view to them. Slanting is one of those things that you've identified. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously when we're talking about argumentation, or particularly when we're talking about the media, we're talking about institutions that were relied upon for their objective reporting. We want the information so that we can make the calls. But increasingly what's happening in schools of journalism or in particular media outlets is that you're seeing the journalists taking on an agenda and slanting the information that they're sending our way. So really the example that I use in the article is there's a big difference between saying, only 600 people turned up to these protests, which implies not a very big deal, or at least 600 people turned up to these protests, which is saying, lots of people, really big deal. It's the same fact, but you're slanting it in a particular direction.
So like a large crowd of at least 600 protesters versus only 600 protesters.
That's exactly right. And there's lots of ways that can be done. It can be done through the accents that are used if it's a spoken media, or it can be done through the descriptors that you put in and around the numbers themselves. But essentially what you're doing is you're not just telling the person the fact, you're telling them what they ought to think about the fact.
Yeah, great. And so let's finish off then with a very catch-all reference that you've got here, out of context Hitler quote. So you've got a few of those. Red herrings, loaded questions, genetic fallacy, and straw man. So there's quite a few there. But it seems that a lot of people do, if they don't want you to, if they want to destroy your argument, they tend to go to Hitler, World War II, Nazi quotes.
Or some other fascist, let's not be too
we're not just Hitler, other fascists
right.
as well.
That's right. I think essentially they're trying to destroy an idea by association. So if we can say that anyone else has, and anyone with a particularly bad reputation has said something
anyone
similar.
We can all agree is evil, it has something similar that's come out of their mouth.
Yes. And I think that the point is similar, it's which in this particular case, Christopher Luxon said something in the same thematic area as Hitler. But it definitely wasn't the same thing that Hitler was saying, and definitely not
Hitler's
in the same
policy,
way. And it definitely wasn't actually even his point. So I talk about the straw man, and in this instance is saying that what Christopher Luxon was actually talking about was encouraging people to have more babies, which actually his central argument was talking about the fact that New Zealand needed more people.
Yes.
And he made a flippant comment about having more babies as a means of achieving that. But that wasn't his argument. And so you're sending people off down another train of thought that has nothing to do with the central theme that we're talking about.
I have to say, when I read that article and I, the headline is like, we need to have more babies to save New Zealand. And I was like, okay. And I read the article, I was like, there's nothing in this. Like it was an off the cuff comment, and just that idea of building stuff around that. And
how can we make a good decision when we've started talking about Hitler? Nothing good is going to happen past that point.
Right. When exactly. We've just destroyed all conversation and decision-making abilities then. Well, Natasha, lots to think about in this article this week. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And now let's hear from Natasha as she reads her column.
Our collective noses have been crinkling at the distinct whiff of something not quite right in the press for some time now. But this week has been a particular corker for unveiling some fishy elements of the New Zealand media. RNZ has unwittingly acted as a Kiwi branch of the Russian propaganda machine, staff reporting has been off balance, and TVNZ is pulling the Hitler card. There are many good media professionals working hard to sort out the polluted pond. But what can we do in the meantime? At times like these, I turn to my trusty field guide on fallacious fishes, and I thought I would share a few of the most common culprits with you. So pull on your waders and grab your rods. We're going to take a look at some basic principles on what to reel in and what to chuck back in the murky blue depths of political reporting. Arguing that something is true because a particular person or media outlet reported it is an example of a Latin fish called ad verecundiam, or appeal to authority. Just because a purported Reuters or BBC article says it doesn't make it true. It could in fact be propaganda dressed in Reuters scales. Always interrogate your catch and verify facts with other sources. Check for slanting. This virulent infection has spread through schools of journalism, shaping the tone of the article to reflect the reporter's bias and influence the way you respond to the facts provided. Consider the difference between only 600 protesters and a crowd of 600 protesters. A fleet of little fishes all agreeing with one another does not a scientific consensus make, as Stuff has found out this week in its failed attempt to use ad populum, appeal to the masses, to convince the New Zealand Media Council that they didn't need to provide both sides of the argument in their article on puberty blockers. Always check that you hear both sides of the story. If the particular source you are tuning into only appears to present unified voices, throw out a wider net. Finally, if a fish quotes Hitler outside the context of World War II, abandon ship. Kushler Norman's Lebensborn reference was a collective catch of red herring, irrelevant points distracting from the argument, loaded question, asking a question to which there is no acceptable answer, genetic fallacy, undermining an argument by reference to unsavoury characters who may have held a similar view, and a straw man, creating an effigy of an argument in order to dispute it, among others. There are a great many more fallacious fish in the sea. Fortunately, there are some excellent resources out there to help us to identify them. If we can become better consumers of the news, we can protect ourselves against inaccuracy and manipulation. The media are responsible for providing accurate and balanced reporting. We are responsible for considering what is on our hook before we take it home to the kitchen.
Thanks for listening to the Maxim Institute podcast. If you'd like to hear more from us and keep up with the rest of our research and analysis of politics and policy in New Zealand, you can sign up on the homepage of our website to get our monthly forum email and invitations to future Maxim Institute events. You can search and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. From the team at Maxim, mā te wā. Goodbye for now.